My name's Virginia Holman. I'm the president of Island Wildlife Cape Fear Region. We're a chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, and I'm really pleased to be welcoming Janisse Ray today. I'll be frank, when I started to write today's introduction, all I could think of at first was what Janisse's work and writing means to me. And then I had to stop because Janisse Ray's writing, and indeed her career as a writer, naturalist, and activist, concerns each and all of us. Her stories pulse with life and poetry and connect us to what matters in the world, within our human, plant, and animal communities, in our homes, and our bodies. To me, she is a writer of the highest order because her stories help show us how to live. Janisse Ray is the author of numerous books, including Wild Spectacle, The Seed Underground, Pinhook, and Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, which was a New York Times notable book. She's won a Southern Booksellers Award for Poetry, a Southeastern Booksellers Award for Nonfiction, an American Book Award, the Southern Environmental Law Center Award for Outstanding Writing, and a Southern Book Critics Circle Award. She lives on a sustainable farm in southern Georgia with her husband, the artist Raven Waters. Please welcome Janisse Ray. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia, and thank you, Madison. Thank you, everybody, for giving up an hour, a lunch hour. So maybe you're sitting on a picnic table someplace eating your lunch, and thank you for tuning in. Virginia asked me to talk today about my latest book, Wild Spectacle. I haven't had a book come out since my last was 2012 when I published The Seed Underground about heirloom vintage seeds and you know our food supply basically. And during that the ensuing 10 years, my husband and I adopted our niece, and we've been taking care of her. So she's in high school and she's fine. But it's really great to sort of be able to go to my desk again and not be so caught up with mom kind of activities. I wanted to write this book. I've been a nature writer since my first book came out in '99, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood. There I was looking at longleaf pine forests, which were 99% gone by 1995 when Reed Noss surveyed endangered ecosystems in the United States, and he found that longleaf pine was critically endangered. I wanted to tell the story of this mesmerizing, magnificent landscape that was once the largest landscape in America, longleaf, and I knew nobody would read a book about a pine tree. So I decided to make a memoir out of it, to use my very interesting childhood on a junkyard in South Georgia to tell this bigger story. So along the way, so then for my whole life as a writer, I have been crossing wild landscapes, visiting them, gathering up their stories, coming back to tell their stories. It's been really a blessed life. In this last book, I wanted to do a collection of essays, kind of the same way that John McPhee will do when he writes essays all year and they go into the New Yorker. And at the end of the year, he'll publish this collection of really stunning work. And that's what I wanted to do. So I began to look back through essays of mine that had both never published and had published. And I found this theme of just wildness and what wildness means. I thought it was important because almost hourly, we all are getting bad news about the environment. We realize more and more profoundly how deeply we are in a climate crisis, and yet we see very little action on the part of our government and even on the part of our neighbors and ourselves to address the climate catastrophe. And that is leading us into a lot of grief. So as we continue to lose wildness and wild things, I just thought it might be helpful to write a book, to publish work that shows the extent of what we're losing. Yeah, let me just read you a paragraph. Out beyond houses and mailboxes, roads and bridges, a person can see a realm that exists alongside this world in which we humans live. I say again, another world flanks the constructed one. Often the view from ours is skewed as through fractile glass, limited by narrow apertures of scope and angle and crack. We can't see it on demand. In the wild world, relationship is evolutionary, time is geologic, beauty is intelligent. There we find ourselves under a powerful spell. Although I was reared on a junkyard by parents who did not waste time hiking or camping, I knew pine trees and pitcher plants, bobcats and brown thrashers as my people. I understood wild things to be beings with intentions, foremost a searing desire to lead pleasurable, fulfilling lives. Once the native storyteller Joseph Bruchac explained to me that there are people to whom animals are attracted. Later, I met such a person, an Abenaki man named Oness. He visited environmental studies classes at a university where I was in residence, and my colleagues described an odd thing that often occurred during Oness's visits. As he sat outside on a green or by a lake, talking to students about his ethos, an animal would ease up to listen. It might be a heron or a squirrel, an alligator. When Oness lectured my own class, we convened outside too, and I was gobsmacked when a black racer came sliding along with its head lifted from the mown grass, startling my students. It circled behind Oness before hunkering down in shrubbery as if to eavesdrop. I am a writer with a desire to immerse myself in the varied wild, to survey the territory of wildness, to be wild, and perhaps to become the kind of person to whom animals listen and who listens to animals. I explore places of natural spectacle and abundance. The less mitigated and trammeled, the better. Because I was born in the 20th century, I've missed wonders that mavericks like Bartram, Carver, Crazy Horse, Muir, Sacagawea, and Tubman saw. Flocks of passenger pigeons, packs of red wolves. I mourn that loss. On the other hand, I have seen wonders that humans decades hence will be unable to see. I have, in my luckiest moments, lived heart-pounding flashes of wild spectacle. And then let me just read you the very last. This book is about a longing to experience our landscapes deeply, as dwellers, as eaters, as seekers, as learners, and especially as passers through, because in the grandest scheme, we're all visitors, just visiting this planet. Death, the trackless wilderness, waiting to be explored. Here is what I found, saw, heard, thought, what I learned when I sojourned in the wild. I am right now reading Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind, which is about the science. He's exploring there the science of psychedelics. And I'm in a chapter right now where he's talking about mystical experiences and how one is able to have mystical experiences through, through a medium like a psychedelic, like LSD or psilocybin, but also through these entirely natural means like breath work, holotropic breath work, or fasting, or lots of prayer. And what I just read last night is there is this way that the sight of of wild beauty, of some amazing, incredible experience, even some near-death experience. But it doesn't have to be near death. Just a stunning, amazing experience can cause in a person something that in the brain simulates a mystical experience. And another very interesting thing I learned last night reading was that I don't do psychedelics, and I don't take LSD and psilocybin. I'm not saying I never will, but I haven't. There's also a way that once people take a psychedelic, they report an affinity with the earth, with wild things, and with nature. So I thought that was just fascinating, because in some ways, I mean, this book just, it borders on a spirit world. And you can see that in the language that I use, and even how I'm talking to you right now. And it took me until last night to realize that in many ways, we who love nature are almost continuously having these mystical or near mystical experiences. The book is divided into 3 sections. The first section, almost every essay in there, in fact, every one takes place in Montana. That happens because it was to Montana that I went to learn nature writing. I studied with the great Western nature writer, William Kittredge. And just because it was a coming of age experience, lots of wonderful things happened to me there. And that's the entire first section. The middle section, I was born poor, but I was able to travel, especially, I received a month-long residency in Sitka, Alaska. So I was able to go to Sitka and experience that. I've never been able to go to places like, I probably will never see the great carnivores of Africa, the great savannas. But of the places I have been able to see, that middle section are more far-flung places. And then something happened 13 years ago that changed that trajectory. And that was, I stopped flying. So there is no judgment in what I'm saying. I am not asking you to stop flying, but I have not been on an airplane in 13 years. I'm not saying I will never get on an airplane again. If my son, who lives in Northampton, Mass, if he gets ill today and he needs me to come, I will hope to be on a plane by evening to get there as fast as possible. But it was a way that I could, as I learned from the writer and my friend Gary Nabhan, weave my life back together. It just, if I would be invited to Portland, Oregon to go to a bookstore. I would get there and there'd be 7 people in the audience, and I'd be just preaching my heart out about the loss of nature and habitat destruction and the climate crisis. After having spewed thousands of pounds of CO2 into the atmosphere, I think that when our walk doesn't match our talk, that we experience a kind of mental illness, a kind of schizophrenia. And I wanted to correct that in my own life. So the last section of the book are journeys, but they're journeys that are more local, more regional, more inward, more spiritual. So speaking of local, if you were on early, I took Virginia and Madison on a little tour. I live on an organic farm in southern Georgia. It's 13 miles to the nearest little town. We grow a lot of our own food. We have a lot of animals, a lot of fruits and vegetables and gardens, and a lovely life, but a fairly lonely life. Until I do things like this, like get to spend lunch with you guys. Let me just tell you what I'm going to do here, and then so you're not just wondering how this is going to be set up. I thought that I would talk to you for a minute, then read you one short 4-page chapter from the book. That'll take another 10 minutes or so, and then we will open up the floor for questions, and I will answer or attempt to answer anything that you would like to ask me, or that you have the courage to ask me. Also, I will at some point type my email address and Facebook account in the chat. And so you can always find me, even if you're shy now and you want to get in touch with me later, please do. If you would like a signed copy of Wild Spectacle, I'll put my, website in there. And otherwise, I'd love for you to support your local bookstores if you're going to get a copy, or your local library. Virginia asked me to speak a little bit about nature and how we expect nature to pay for itself. So 20 years ago, I was part of a team fighting a titanium mine that was threatening Okefenokee Swamp. We're in the middle of another such threat. Twin Pines is trying to mine titanium on Trail Ridge, the eastern sill to the swamp. And, the fight continues. Hopefully this time we will get legislation in place that will end it forever. But while that fight was going on, I really embraced ecotourism. I just thought that it was the perfect way that a wild area could pay for itself and get saved, still bring in money to local people. And here's my thinking about that now. I'm going to read you first a section from, I believe it's Arches. The next morning, we make pancakes and set out through Devil's Garden, past Landscape Arch and Wall Arch. Two redtails spiral over a swath of wildflowers. We climb the side of Double O, an arch above the arch. To the east, Dark Angel, a coffee brown spire, watches. The earth around her is so deep red, I collect a tablespoon. The relentless beauty and the beautiful relentlessness of the land leave me weak-kneed. There's a family, 2 little boys. Don't slide on your pants, the mother commands. As the day wears on, dozens more sightseers appear. Returning from Dark Angel, a group of older teenage boys clots the trail. They look like fraternity brothers. One has caught a sagebrush lizard and holds it aloft. Take my picture, he says to his friend. Close to your face, says the friend. This is a super zoom. Hey man, that's the poisonous kind, another says. The guy holds the lizard closer, then dangles it above his open mouth. The boys laugh. When the picture is taken, the boy with the lizard flicks it too hard into a scrubby bush. The boys laugh again and trample on up the hill. Why did he have to do that? My friend Mick says. Hey, I call after the boys, trying not to be angry. You all need to treat wild animals with more respect. A couple at the rear of the group turn around and I repeat, pass the word up, I say. And he yells ahead, hey, you all need to treat wild animals with more respect. I think it landed in this bush, says Mick. We comb the inch-long leaves of a creosote looking and can't find the lizard, although Silas spots a baby lizard underneath the bush in the sand. Then I find one that looks as if it's been dead for weeks, dangling from a miniature crotch. We don't know where the flicked lizard went. I come back to the dead lizard, thinking to show it to Silas, but when I touch the carcass gingerly, the head moves. This dying, almost dead lizard is the one the boy flung. Sometimes life just evaporates. I sink in the middle of the trail, hang my head in my hands, and burst into tears. I have no idea why I cry so much over spoiled nature, and not just the big things like political losses or finding out a beautiful forest is gone. I cry if a single tree falls. I feel the tree speaking through my body. I feel actual pain. The image of a crucified lizard, its tiny eye winking in the brokenness of its body, sticks in my mind. I cry as if tears are all I have to speak with. How can we be so careless with life? I became extremely conflicted about ecotourism. The more I studied economics, the more convinced I was that a global extraction economy is killing us and the things we love. A local economy would solve some of those problems, and a sound local economy would not be dependent on outside revenues. For all its benefits, then, ecotourism only functions inside a global economy. Ecotourism is not an earth-friendly industry. It is simply an industry, often resulting in the Disneyfication of the wild. It comes at a price. Public access is not an inalienable right. Ecotourism without education is a product, and education without transformation is pointless. One danger of ecotourism is that people go into nature for the same reasons they switch on the television, which is for entertainment. Nature's job is not to entertain. Nature's job is to provide essentials like clean air, filtered water, mediation of the climate, and so forth, without having to be bothered with us. Nature's job is to keep us sane. Nature's job is to blow our minds. Its job is to provide services that cannot be measured in money: sanctuary, peace, beauty, knowledge, wisdom. Some things ought to exist outside capitalism, and wildness should be one of them. There you go, Virginia. That's your little lesson, your little sermon there on money and nature. So let me read the manatee chapter, and then we'll, let's see, 1222. Y'all doing okay out there?
Janisse,
Thank you again.
I may be getting a little bit of feedback from page turning near your microphone.
Oh my gosh.
So just
okay.
Mindful.
I'll be a little more careful with that, y'all.
Appreciate it.
Virginia, can you hear anything else? Does everything else sound okay?
Everything's perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay. It's early morning, November, and I heave out of a guide boat, splashing into silver water at the exact place where one of Florida's high magnitude limestone springs, Three Sisters, rises into a Blackwater river, the Crystal. I'm wearing a black wetsuit, tight as an extra layer of skin, and a snorkel mask. I'm here to see manatees, which will not hurt me, I am told, and in their curiosity may approach me, although I may not move toward them or even reach out to touch one should it approach. The water is 72 degrees, the November air chilly, and to keep warm, I stay submerged, floating at the edge of the spring. I can't see more than 10 or 12 feet in the light green silty water. If manatees are below or around, as the guides promised, I can't see them. I puff through the blowhole of the snorkel, my face turned away from the light, trying to make sense of the furry stumps and uneven topography of the sepulchral river bottom. Suddenly, two monstrous shapes materialize out of the watery gloom. They are titanic. They are within yards of me before I see them, and my heart leaps. Manatees are vegetarian, I remind myself. They eat water weeds and grasses. Though many times a human's weight, they are entirely benign. These paddle slowly, buoyant, languidly moving a fin to propel. Both of them head straight toward me. Who would have imagined their curiosity? Who would have dreamed they wanted us? They glide past, observing me. They note my big glass eyes, my seal-like skin, my shivering body. You can touch us, they say. In the next moment, I break federal law. I reach out and let the body of the second manatee brush against my hand. The manatee instantly pivots, as if my touch communicated something necessary. It positions itself alongside, rolls over, and presents its belly. Its fins are like arms, its tail huge and rounded. It keeps looking at me with one comely brown eye. I am pretty sure that the manatee wants its belly scratched. I put my hand there. Its taboo hide is rough, covered with crusty barnacles and slimy with algae, and also soft, mammalian, warm. That quickly, a manatee is in my arms. I can't talk. I can't smile. I can't say anything with my eyes. All I have to communicate with is my hand, now softly stroking the manatee's belly, and also one other thing, which I don't have a name for. After a minute, the manatee slowly paddles on. 3 others come. They go. 5 appear. They all seem to be taking turns checking out the visitors. Now below, I can make out manatees resting on the river bottom in deep greenish silt. What I thought was the pocked bed of the river is a fat knot of sea cows, defenseless and strange. Some seem to lie atop each other in a surreal and merciful sweetness. When one needs air, it lifts lazily through the layered, calcinated, astonished water, then sinks again in that slow fall from sparkle to decay. I quit using my hands. I pump my feet and glide. I glide again. I roll. What interests me this morning is a cathedral of spring, how the new rays of sun refract to points in front of me in the clear and unspeakable water. When a manatee approaches, easing next to me, I put my goggled head against its side. My cheek rests against a series of rigid scars. The propellers of motorboats have cut the animal deeply, more than once. I blow water from my tube and examine all the manatees I can see. Almost all their backs are scarred. A mother and calf dispatch from the group below. They dally closer. The calf quits nursing when it sees me. It comes up as if I'm its friend, tumbles next to me, looks me in the eyes, swims, tumbles. I roll with it, breathing when I reach the surface. The mother nudges her baby away and rubs her body against mine. She rolls. She does this again and again. The manatees have mistaken me for something I am not. The mother stops rolling. With her searching eyes, she pores over me. She puts her face next to mine, looking. The manatee's eye is a wrinkled spiral. Immersed in all the unknowns, all the mysteries, we gaze at each other. I shouldn't tell you what happened. It's too precious, really, to reveal something like this so randomly. But maybe if I tell you, your life will be touched, as mine was, and some magnetic poles deep within you will align. I feel the manatee and myself entering another plane. It is wordless and weightless, fluid, beautifully light. 1,000,000 crystals are sparkling. We are in the world, the human world, where an eco tour guide waits with a towel and a cup of hot cocoa, but also another world. There's no word really for this place we have come. It's one of the other worlds, a place beyond reason, beyond the material, beyond the visible. A manatee spirit is big, and it will merge with a human spirit, which is likewise big. Then I hear the manatee mother speak to me. She's beseeching me. You must help us, she says. You must help us. I hear her distinctly. You must help us. She turns, blows at the surface, nudges her baby, and sinks away back into the dissension of the primitive river bottom. Something rises in me that has been rising for a long time, and I break into the sentient air, dizzy, trembling, and blind with love. Manatees. Thank you. Thank you. I would love to I'd love to have a dialogue here if you would like. And I don't know, Virginia, if you want to unmute and let's start talking.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm going to go through the Q&A here for folks. We have an anonymous attendee who is asking, since it's sometimes been shown that a nationally designated wilderness area attracts more visitation, with simply naming the area as wilderness, how do you feel about adding new land to the nation's wilderness system?
Virginia, do you mind repeating the first part? So it's how do I feel about adding new land, but it's because of why?
Since it's sometimes been shown that a nationally designated wilderness area can attract more visitation by that designation as wilderness, how do you feel about adding new land to the nation's wilderness system? That's the question.
I'm all for adding new land. I think that I don't know if you can hear that chicken crowing out, that rooster crowing. I believe there's a continuum, that begins with wilderness on one end, and that is represented by, let's just say, our time as hunter-gatherers, going into agrarian lives, from the time we became agricultural and began to settle down, maybe 12,000 years ago. Moving on into industrialism. So wilderness would be represented by an old growth forest, agrarianism by a field, industrialism by a factory. And now we move into technologism, or whatever we're going to call it. And that would be represented more by, like a bank of computers operated by a robot or something like that. I always want the trajectory to be moving back toward wilderness. So anything that we can save is going to save humans in the end. Those places are repositories for natural processes, for, wild places are the places where trees take in CO2 and give off oxygen, the opposite of what we do. They filter our water so that we have cleaner water to drink. The mycelium, they're in so many ways they filter toxicity. So I'm always, always thrilled when any land is protected from the hand of industrialism. And I want to just tell you that I separate humans. I know that we are all a part of this industrial, military, capitalist system, but I think a lot of what we do is asked of us by that system. So I just think there's an unfair advantage that we gave the system early on, where capitalism, for example, has the rights of personhood. And we could go very deeply into that, but I'm thrilled when land is purchased for wilderness, set aside for wilderness.
Someone is asking or commenting, your words are inspirational. You have always been and always will be a voice of reason, honesty, and comfort. In your life, can you share any experiences that made you who you are today, an awakening to nature and the voice that you carry?
I think thank you so much for that. Thank you very much. I think that I pretty much tried to explore that in the first book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, where I really tried to look at my life on the junkyard and my life with my dad, who was manic depressive, and all the ways that life shaped me. I have to say, I've learned so much about trauma as an adult, and adverse childhood experiences. I wasn't the child of divorce, but if a child's parents divorce, every time a child moves, if a child has a parent who's an alcoholic, all those things get little check marks on the chart of adverse childhood experiences. And for many years, I assumed that I didn't have those. And now I realized, very, very distinctly that living with mental illness, like living in a situation where you never knew what was coming at you, was definitely an adverse childhood experience. But what it taught me was that I could find peace and more certainty, stillness, quiet in nature. Mm-hmm. So that was a seminal experience growing up. And there's no judgment about what my father endured. It is what it is. But it did shape me. And then beyond that, I was just lucky enough to fall in with people, in the late. So I was raised in '62, and I really miss that whole. I think we do a disservice to the countercultural movement of the '60s, when we just in all of our movies and our books, we just so much make fun of hippies, and I do it too. I've been known to call myself a hippie tree hugger. I really came at the end of that movement, but that movement really ignited just the whole earth movement. I believe was so important in us beginning to reconsider our relationship to the earth, to each other on the earth. So when I was very young, just leaving home and going off to college, I fell in with people who were part of the countercultural movement. That, ideas in that movement just blew all of our notions apart. Ideas of, that the banks don't have to own your money. You can own your money through a credit union. Mm-hmm. You can keep your money. You don't have to tie your feet up in stirrups to have a baby. You can have a baby at home with a midwife. You don't have to eat food that's processed in labs. You can go in your kitchen and prepare real food. You don't have to eat food that's dyed, like white rice, bleached. Just so many ways that. So, beyond childhood and the mental illness that ran through my family, it would have been being introduced to a countercultural back to the land movement. That was probably not an answer you expected.
It is a great answer, though. Jill Palusas is saying that she read your book, Ecology of a Cracker Childhood, as an undergrad assignment, and that it was so eye-opening and amazing to discover the links between the longleaf pine ecosystem and the animals. Thank you for your works and your words. They're very powerful.
Jill, thank you. Thank you. So since we have a couple more minutes, if anybody has questions about writing or, we can, or, yeah.
Sean Sexton is asking, Janisse, did you always know that what you wanted to write about, or did you find it trying to write about other things?
When I was young, when I was introduced to the longleaf pine ecosystem, and I did not, I started out writing poetry like you write, Sean, although you write it better than I do. But when I was about 28 years old, older than that, 26, 32. I was 32. I went to South America to teach English. So I was still really uncertain about what I wanted to be and do. I was walking one Sunday afternoon in the Andean mountains. It's just this dirt road that went way back into the mountains. And I was making a just hours long trek. And I knew I would be returning to the United States soon. I was in Colombia. And I kept trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And I realized I had this gigantic desire to write And I had a gigantic desire to be an environmental activist, to somehow help preserve nature. And I was way back on this trail in the Andes, and some voice said to me, put them together. And it was one of those epiphanic moments that we all long for and wait for. So when I came back to the United States, I immediately began to do that. I began to volunteer at Florida Wildlife Magazine in your great state, Sean. And I joined the Audubon Society. I began to look for a place that I could go study nature writing. Nature writing was a pretty new genre right then, very new, actually. There was one place, or a couple of places, where you could get a degree. The University of Montana was one place. You had to get accepted in the creative writing department, but once there, you could take classes in environmental studies. And that's what I did. I worked for Florida Wildlife for about 2 years, and then got a scholarship to go to the University of Montana. And that I've been just walking that path. I have recently, this is me in my unrelenting honesty, but more recently, I have become more concerned that I am not concerned about stories being incredibly transformative tools. They transform hearts, minds, cultures, countries, but fewer and fewer people, books have fewer and fewer efficacy in the world. Fewer books are selling. It's harder to make a living writing books. Fewer people are reading books. The people who do understand books are still reading, maybe even more than ever. But there are just millions and millions of people who are watching YouTube videos and not reading. So I've lately become a little more concerned that this is the best way to reach masses of people. I know it's not, but I haven't transitioned. I'm still writing.
Right. We have Kathy Matthews from the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, who says you came to speak some number of years ago and stayed with her family in Efland, and thanks you for your ongoing work. She has a question. She's been thinking a lot about all of the pets, cats and dogs, especially, that people own. And we're aware of the issues that outdoor cats cause. We all love pets, but the number of pets can be very problematic. Are you aware of others working on this issue? And do you have any thoughts on it?
E.O. Wilson's book, Biophilia, addresses pets and what they mean. And in that book, he says, that pets, the same reason we evolved from the savannas of Africa. So those open treeless plains where we could see danger coming are very comforting to us, which is one of the reasons why we want to cut down all the trees and have large expanses of lawn. And yet in that book, he says, like the most lawns in the world and your pets are not ever going to take the place of wildness. So I hear what you're saying. I know that plenty of groups are working on feral cats, and I am just not the person to tackle this idea. I mean, I understand how unsustainable pets can be, but I'm probably not going to say anything about it,
Someone is asking, Jack Sproul is asking, saying that you must live somewhat close to the operating wood pellet plants in Waycross, Hazelhurst. I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, Nahunta and Lumber City, Georgia, and the proposed plants in Adel and Ideal, Georgia. What do you have to say about those plants and the wood pellet industry?
I have been fighting industrial forestry and industrial clear cutting for all of my adult life. That's all I have to say. I have been fighting it. A lot of those pellets get shipped out. We want to say that Pellets are a sustainable fuel source. They are in no way sustainable. We are adding, every forest we cut down adds to the climate catastrophe. All we want to do is talk about fossil fuels and what needs to happen with reducing fossil fuels and increasing gas standards and so forth. And I think we haven't even begun to address the part that reforestation and restoration of our forests has to play in the climate crisis.
Pearl McHaney, I'm toggling between comment sections here, asks, what are your thoughts about the role of arts, visual, musical, and writing as activism?
Mm-hmm. Hey, Pearl. So good to have old friends on here. Thank you all for coming today. I know that plenty of people think that the two should be separate, but for me, my writing is a form of activism. I also want to be the best writer I can be. I want to be a great, great writer. I want to be a great poet, but I believe that artists and poets are the vision keepers and the vision seekers. And it is through art that we really we make new worlds. Yeah, I think they're on the front lines of envisioning better worlds.
I'm trying to give everybody a chance here. Someone is Karen Town is asking, she's teaching ecology of the Cracker childhood in a college class called Southern Landscapes. And she's asking, how would you say that your view of the natural world has been shaped by being raised in the rural South?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's Kathy. Thank you for
Karen.
Karen, thank you, Karen, for teaching ecology. And your class, Southern Landscapes, just sounds marvelous. I'd love to take that class. So I realized that the South is it's full of very different landscapes. And I think in general, it's more botanic. It's, for example, the West, especially the desert Southwest, is geologic. But there is also I think of Southern Landscapes as being deeply storied places. And partly that's because of early settlement, that, and I also think it's a shame, just because, since we're on this track, I think it's a shame that by the time we were in the land preservation movement in this country, saving places like Yellowstone and Glacier, that the South, hold on, somebody's leaving a message and I thought I'd turned it off. The South had already been mostly settled by the time that the late 1800s, early 1900s. So we just didn't get our share of big national parks and so forth. I hope I've answered that question correctly. I think that there is something that the South brings that is very different from any other region in the country.
I think that leads right into Ruth Ann Grissom's question. She's asking you to talk about your efforts to create a national park around the Mounds, or expand the national park around the Mounds in South Georgia.
That is a superbly exciting project. It is happening. John Wilson, the great activist who was working with the Altamaha Riverkeeper years ago, 25 years ago, he first told me this idea. That's like, we should have this river is so beautiful. It's such an important area. This should be a national park. And I just thought, like, you are one crazy guy. And yet he plugged away and plugged away. He formed a group, he segged out, somebody else came in, and by golly, all these years later, that vision of John Wilson is coming to pass. So at the moment, the the group, there's a grassroots group who's driving the initiative. They have hired a young woman who is part of the Muskogee Creek Nation. And she's just been on board maybe a month, that she's already been to DC lobbying Deb Haviland. And there's just, I want to tell you one thing most people don't know. The Muskogee Creek were forced out. Well, they actually left, and then they were forced out of another part of Georgia. But about 5 years ago, they repurchased a piece of their native homeland. And it just gives me goosebumps to talk about it. And I believe that we're going to see in the next 6 months to a year, we're going to see the Muskogee Creek people's homeland completely protected. Not just the 700 acres that we have at the Mulkey Mounds. We're going to have a landscape-wide national park in central Georgia.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Patricia is asking, we've got time for about one or two more questions before you have to scoot, I know. How do you keep from losing hope? Jane Goodall thinks the youth will be different and education will change our trajectory. What do you think? How do you keep from losing
Virginia,
hope?
do you mind asking the second question as well? And maybe I can do them both at once.
I think the second part is the question after this one. Joshua Lavender is saying, I read a few tensions in your writing between nature for humans and nature for itself, or read a few tensions. How do you think we can preserve wilderness as a space for human spiritual renewal, which I agree it is, without letting it be exploited or harmed by humans? How do we make sure it remains nature for itself too?
Oh, that's a beautiful question, Josh. And I think I think we just have to have places where humans don't really go. You know, humans are going to stay on the sidewalk. They're going to see Old Faithful, and they're not going to so much get off the beaten path and go, you know, hike for a week to get back to the Chinese Wall in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. But I agree. And the only answer that I can think of for your specific question would be regulations. You know, we as industrialists and as capitalists, we are always denigrating regulations, but regulations are wonderful things, and that they protect what we love. That's a great question, Josh, and hey to you. And then so the question about hope is one that I talk about a lot, and I'll just end with this one. People ask me almost everywhere, like, you know, am I hopeful? If so, how do I stay hopeful? You know, how do I hang on to hope? And I know there's a difference between hope and optimism. You know, I've read all that, but there's this other thing. And that is, I realized one morning I was lying in bed and I realized it doesn't matter where I'm hopeful or not. What the problem is, listen closely to me here. The problem is we associate hope with action, and we associate hopelessness with depression, paralysis, inaction. You get it? So we want everybody to stay hopeful, so they'll keep getting up and doing what they need to do and fighting and writing the letters and calling their senators. But it's not about either of those things. When my daughter arrived to my home, she had what's called attachment disorder. That means she had such pathologic care. And by the way, the beeping you hear in the background is her calling me. She left a message, even though I told her I was doing a Zoom. She had such pathologic care when she was a baby, you know, so she cries and there was nobody there to feed her or change her diaper, that she didn't attach to anybody. So for years and years and years, my work as a mom, as a parent, was bonding with my child. An unbonded person has no conscience. So my job was forming love, was making sure love happened between me and this little girl who had come to live with me. She was 7. And to that end, I rode her on my body as much as possible. I put her in a rocking chair and would feed her caramels. She was a small girl, and I would put sweet milk in a bottle and rock her and bottle feed her. So all these things I did to create love. And I think the same kind of disattachment is what is happening between us and the earth. Are you understanding me? We have become disattached from our own mothers. And so it's not hope we need. I mean, if anybody needs hope, it's Mother Earth who needs to have hope in us. But it's really love. It's that we have to figure out ways to retrain ourselves to love the earth. And if it takes psychedelics to do it, do them. If it takes going outside on walks every day, grounding, sitting in the sun, for me, it's really about beauty. And these things I talked about in the beginning, which are the mystical experiences of nature, which diminish our egos. Those mystical, beautiful, wild spectacles dissolve our egos. So it's not us versus it. We are it. So do you see, are you following me a little bit? I almost never talk about hope. Do I have a lot of hope that we're going to turn the climate? We are going to suffer as a species because of the climate crisis. Hundreds of thousands and millions of us are going to suffer. We're going to suffer loss of property, loss of life. We're going to become refugees. We're going to suffer heat. We're going to suffer storms. It is not going to be pretty. But does that mean you don't still love, and in that love do everything you can, everything asked of you, everything possible? Do you give up? Do you say it's okay for you to drink out of plastic bottles just because they're offered at the store? You just never give up. How I love is I look out every morning at the pear tree. Let me show you my husband's painting of the pear. Can you see that in the? That's a fall painting of the pear. I look out at that pear tree every morning. The sun is rising behind it. Yesterday it was just filled with about 100 robins, and that's my hope.
Well, that's wonderful, and I wish that I could continue this conversation because I know you need to hop off. But I just cannot thank you enough for sharing your lunch hour with us, Janisse. And I know some of you didn't get your questions answered, and we'll be sending out the recording to you all. And Janisse, would you like us to include some sort of reference so people can reach out to you?
No. That would be great, Virginia.
Okay.
I was going to try to quickly write my email in the chat, but let me just send you ways that people can find me, if that's okay.
That's perfect. That's very good. And hopefully everyone can get their questions answered that way. Janisse, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you all.
And just a treat.
Virginia, thank you all at Island Wildlife Chapter, the Cape Fear chapter of the North Carolina Wildlife Federation, for all that you do to save the North Carolina coast, all of North Carolina, excuse me, all of the South, all of this glorious, beautiful world. Thank you for your great work. And thanks everybody who is here today. Thank you for caring enough to sign on. And thank you for all that you have done and all that you will do. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.